Okay, we are on, and I didn't hook up my good microphone again. All right, maybe next time. We're doing chapter 3 on Radicals for Capitalism, the 3 Furies of Libertarianism, talking about 3 influential women. Okay, the modern American libertarian movement can convincingly be traced back to the work of 3 women, all friends, at least for a time. With Ayn Rand, you know it was always just for a time. I don't think she kept any lifelong friends. The first major works on political and ideological matters all appeared, actually their first works, all appeared in 1943, predating Hayek's serfdom. These are Mrs. Isabel Patterson, or is it Paterson? It's just one T, but I guess it's Patterson. Patterson with one T. Rose Wilder Lane and Ayn Rand. So in 43 is her third, in 1943 was Rand's third novel and first success, The Fountainhead. Lane's was The Discovery of Freedom, and Patterson's was The God of the Machine. Obviously, I know The Fountainhead. I did not know the other two. So first they deal with Patterson. And it's interesting that this is a period of time where there were still people who had lived on the frontier, and Patterson was one of them. And it says that Patterson recognized that frontier society offered the most civilized type of association because it had the absolute minimum of external regulation and therefore the maximum of voluntary civility and morality. While she was aware of the popular theory that America's chief inheritance from its frontier past is aggressiveness, she considered that theory nonsense. On the frontier, you have to be polite to your fellow man, and it won't get you anywhere to be aggressive to a blizzard. What worked out west wasn't aggressiveness, but a peculiarly, wow, that's a tongue twister, individual, mind your own business, confidence. She cultivated that quality in herself. And there's an interesting saying that was said about her. It said, if people can stand her at all, they eventually become very fond of her. Patterson had become friends with 2 other feisty individualist women, novelists Rose Wilder Lane and Ayn Rand, with whom she could speak sympathetically on her political beliefs. Now, I highlighted a few words in here because I'm learning some vocabulary with this book. A word here I didn't know before is parlous. P-A-R, like Parler, kind of, but O-U-S instead of O-R or O-U-R. And I've got the beach ball. Of course I do. We'll go back to this. Personal liberty, Patterson explained, is the precondition of the release of energy. This is her symbolism. This was her analogy she gave in a book. Private property is the inductor that initiates the flow. Real money is the transmission line, and the payment of debts comprises half the circuit. An empire is merely a long-circuit energy system. The possibility of a short circuit, the ensuing leakage and breakdown or explosion, occurs in the hookup of political organization to the productive processes. Now, at first I thought that was like super cheesy, but I also think it's clever in its own way, particularly with the last bit about the political processes being hooked up. Okay, parlous. Full of danger or uncertainty. Precarious. It also says it's archaic or humorous. Okay, well, okay, let me see here. Oh, never mind. Full of danger or uncertainty. Precarious is the modern use of it. Humorous is the archaic use of it as an adjective. And then there's also an archaic adverb, which means greatly or excessively. The example given, she is parlous handsome, meaning greatly handsome. And handsome's not a word we use for women these days. That, I remember that shooketh me when I read older books, such as The House of Seven Gables, Nathaniel Hawthorne. That term, handsome, was used very often for all genders at that time. While today, that's pretty much exclusively the province of men. Now, the example given here for full of danger or uncertainty or precarious is the parlous state of the economy. And here in the book, it was the parlous state of Western civilization. Okay, and it says, while her metaphors were mechanical to almost an absurd degree, her philosophy was by no means materialist. She begins her long view march through human history with the Romans. She writes that, and I just want to check something here, neither their location nor their material progress, no economic clue accounts for their function. What the past shows, by overwhelming evidence, is that the imponderables outweigh every material article in the scales of human endeavor. Nations are not powerful because they possess wide lands, safe ports, large navies, huge armies, fortifications, stores, money, and credit. They acquire those advantages because they are powerful, having devised on correct principles the political structure which allows the flow of energy to take its proper course. I am not so sure I'm convinced of that. Like, for instance, I mean, I'm no expert by any means, and perhaps I've just read, history is always full of presuppositions, but for instance, that because there wasn't beasts of burden or domesticable, beasts that are able to be domesticated in certain areas of the world, that gave definite advantages to the Europeans. And for instance, though people think the horse was native to North America, it was not. It was brought over by the Europeans and completely revolutionized the American Indian, or the Native American, to be more politically correct. She is in awe of the political genius of the Founding Fathers, calling the Constitution the greatest political document ever struck off at one time by the mind of men. In her survey of American history and political life, she defends classical Republican principles against pure democracy, a consistent libertarian bête noire, because it gives citizens the power to violate anyone's rights or properties merely by majority rule. I agree with her there. Pinpoint slavery, with her criticism of democracy. Pinpoint slavery as the fault in the structure the founders built, agree there. And radically assaults the growth in government since the progressive era in the New Deal, definitely agree there. In doing so, she stakes out a set of positions on economics and politics that have defined the libertarian movement ever since. Patterson came to most of her political and economic ideas independent of contemporary influences. Libertarian theorists usually tout the clearly manifest ethical and practical advantages of liberty, which raises a question. Why do so many people fail to see these obvious advantages of unfettered liberty? Patterson provided an answer, and the chapter most remembered among libertarians, brutally entitled The Humanitarian with the Guillotine. She concluded that if the primary objective of the philanthropist, his justification for living, is to help others, his ultimate goal requires that others shall be in want. Don't think I agree there. That's a rather bleak view, isn't it? His happiness is the obverse of their misery. Another word. Okay, I can suss out what that means, but I don't think I've ever used the word obverse in my life. Synonym. Let me see here. Oh no, that's a suggestion. Derp. Okay. Obverse, the side of a coin or metal bearing the head or principal design. The opposite or counterpart of a fact or truth. If he wishes to help humanity, the whole of humanity must be in need. The humanitarian wishes to be a prime mover in the lives of others. He cannot admit either the divine or the natural order, by which men have the power to help themselves. The humanitarian puts himself in the place of God. No, I just absolutely disagree here. Because the psychological desire, now it could be true in some, because the psychological desire to help others requires others to need help, the humanitarian in theory is the terrorist in action. Nope. Nope, nope, nope. I have to come up with another reason why people do not see the advantages of unfettered liberty. I think it's a bit more base. It's dangerous. It's much more simple to be the eternal child. Peterson's most significant libertarian disciple was Ayn Rand, who acknowledged intellectual debts to no one but Aristotle. Nonetheless, Rand told Patterson, in a letter, "You were the first person to see how capitalism works in specific application. That is your achievement, which I consider a historical achievement of the first importance. I learned from you the historical and economic aspects of capitalism, which I knew before only in a general way, in the way of general principles." But their relationship deteriorated, as all of Rand's relationships do, that's my commentary, and their correspondence ended in a series of arguments. Rand thought Patterson misunderstood her philosophy and refused to give Rand proper credit for her unique contributions besides. And it seems like that was always the constant complaint of Rand. Here's another word that I think I may have used and forgotten what it means. Mordant. Biting. Okay, I don't think I have ever used that. The example here is a mordant sense of humor. I think I have a mordant sense of humor. Even had those conflicts not arisen, the once close Patterson-Rand relationship, Rand used to join Patterson on Monday evenings to help her proof her column in the early 1940s, would have likely come to a cropper. God, his vocabulary is just really fascinating me. Cropper. A machine or person that cuts or trims something. So it seems to be used here very metaphorically. Over religion, an issue about which Rand brooked no disagreement. Rand was a committed and principled atheist. Patterson had written that the axiom of liberty cannot be postulated except on the basis affirmed by Christian philosophy. I don't agree with either woman. When National Review started in 1955, William E. F. Buckley, who greatly admired Patterson's writing, brought her into his fold, but they bickered over pay and editorial changes. It's also noted that, like her friend Rose Wilder Lane, and unlike Ayn Rand, she refused to take money from Social Security. Because of its enduring interest to libertarians and students of American individualist philosophy, The God of the Machine is still in print. Recognizing and celebrating America's unique system of strictly limited Republican government and the necessity of untrammeled private property rights for a healthy, wealthy society, in an age when such ideas were considered radical and absurd, it helped cast the template for modern American libertarian thinking and polemics. And as you know, I always need to transfer these files before they get too big. So I'll transfer this file before we move on to Rose Wilder Lane. Yes, it is a different day, but we are moving on in The Three Furies, Chapter 3. Now we're moving on to Rose Wilder Lane, who's the daughter of Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of Little House on the Prairie. So the title of this subsection is I Am Now a Fundamentalist American. So Rose Wilder Lane is the daughter and possibly ghostwriter for Laura Ingalls Wilder, author of the immensely popular series of children's books known as Little House. And Rose was the author of the 1943 Libertarian classic, The Discovery of Freedom. Now, I had never heard of this book before here. And apparently Rose did a lot of traveling, which informed her thinking. Particularly, she went to Albania and developed a deep love there. And it says also a deep love and respect for Muslim ways, which informed the discovery of freedom, providing it with one of the many interpretive eccentricities that make it such a rich and fascinating book. And here's where the title of this chapter comes. She wrote in the Post that I am now a fundamentalist American. Give me time and I will tell you why individualism, laissez-faire, and the slightly, I got something on my lip, restrained anarchy of capitalism offers the best possibilities for the development of the human spirit. And it mentions her hatred, I feel your pain, for Roosevelt and the New Deal, which intensified through the 1930s. And here's something not very charitable, but it says she once admitted to hoping that he would be killed. She moved to Danbury in 1938, and libertarian advocacy and activism became her whole life. It says the discovery of freedom is a paean to human growth and change. Lane's vision is ideological. Nothing about the laws of nature or human nature changed in America to make it unique. The necessary change, she insisted, was ideological, and I absolutely agree with her. People began realizing the power of free human energy. Lane uses the term religious faith, somewhat eccentrical. Why can't I pronounce this? Eccentrically. That's it. To mean what most people mean nowadays by ideology. She used her peculiar definition to deny that atheism was even possible, since believing in anything, supernatural or not, was religious to her. I tend to agree, but I wouldn't call it religious. I just think that everyone has a metaphysics, and that metaphysics eventually is faith. Any standard of value is tantamount to God. One sees hints in the discovery of freedom of why her friendship with the militantly atheist Rand couldn't last. Some weird kerning in here where Rand, because of his capital, it looks like R and. Wish I could show you that. It's a really strange kerning. I think that, I don't know why that's really distracting me, but it is. It says, though she knew of Mises's work, she never accepted his notion that a communist economy must necessarily collapse. Well, I think it would. Lane thought, they could survive indefinitely and would merely stagnate without the flow of free human energy. I think stagnation would lead to collapse. She wrote at length of 3 attempts in human history to establish and build a culture on the notion of tightening economic controls. She interpreted that manism must be free. The biblical Israelites, the Saracen, which is Muslim, empire created in the centuries after Muhammad and the United States. Oh, actually, okay, I read that wrong. These are the 3 great nations that are founded on how man must be free. That sentence was just really awkward. And she says that tightening economic controls will destroy these 3 nations. Now, she had a contempt for democracy, which I share, though this next sentence I don't. If you're going to have democracy, everyone needs to be able to vote. She says, the superstition that all men have a right to vote is a triumph of old world reasoning. I think thinking they all don't, if you're going to have democracy, is a type of elitism that I just cannot subscribe to. She says extensions of the franchise are dangerous to individual liberty and human rights. How do you decide who has it? I would assume that she would think something about education level and property ownership. Rose didn't do much writing after the discovery of freedom, but kept up a voluminous correspondence with fellow libertarians, young and old, people who had discovered her unique views through Give Me Liberty or the Discovery of Freedom. The last of her young charges and her eventual heir, Roger McBride, was the son of a Reader's Digest editor who was working on condensing a Lane book for that magazine. I thought they were related. I don't know how I thought that. McBride led student libertarian groups at Princeton and Harvard and became a state representative in Vermont. So I wonder how he ended up at Virginia to be the faithless elector, but at this point in the story, he's in Vermont, who bedeviled his fellow legislators with piles of libertarian bills to save his constituents money. He played an important role in the Libertarian Party in the 1970s. Most of Lane's later writings consisted of book reviews for the National Economic Council's Review of Books, a position she inherited from Albert J. Nock in 1945. And she stopped writing for them in 1950 when they wanted to take out Social Security because she kept her official income as low as possible to avoid taxes. Nice. Okay, now this is somewhat a big chunk I'm going to read here. In her later life, Lane once wrote a postcard to a radio host, fingering Social Security as the sort of socialist Bismarckianism we supposedly fought against in World War II. A sedition-sniffing postmaster alerted the FBI, who sent a state police officer to investigate. Oh my God. A young man. Lane asked him if expressing such an opinion was subversive. He said, "Yes, ma'am, it was." Lane thundered back, "Then I'm subversive as all hell. I say this and I write this and I broadcast it on the radio, and I'm going to keep right on doing it till you put me in jail. Write that down and report it to your superiors." Canned vegetables and slaughtered pigs were true Social Security, she insisted. The NEC distributed an account Lane wrote of this little contretemps as a pamphlet, helping make her a folk hero among anti-tax forces. Her libertarianism turned anarchistic. Yay! And except for Laura Ingalls Wilder fans, many of whom still love her, though some resent latter-day attempts to horn Rose in on her mother's glory, only libertarians remember or honor Lane. So it is strange, or a sign of the lack of respect, that the intelligentsia accords libertarian ideas, that Lane's only serious biographer, William Holtz, writes off this portion of Lane's life as little more than a pathology. He wrote that her later political beliefs resulted from a failure of maturity, and that the social scientists reviewing the list of symptoms would find a clear case of American right-wing pathology. Fuck you. And refers, not you watching, this guy, fuck him, even though he's long dead, and refers to the pathos of her journey to that position as if libertarianism were an inherently sad fate. Think the same of me, since mine turned anarchistic as well. And I love this statement, which she wrote to people in her optimism. I said this in my interview with, when I was interviewing Angela McCardle. Every least little thing that you have done has helped to change it, meaning the world. Never think that a bit of it failed, even when it seemed to. She was, however, a keen-eyed heresy spotter. Her special metaphor for the bad ideas that sometimes infected even libertarians was the dead rat found in the middle of a delicious cherry pie. Lane clearly understood the differences between her individualist anti-statist position and the stances of famous right-wingers of her day. In a 1950 letter to Crane, Trying to figure out where he's from. I'm not getting that quickly because I don't think it's talking about Ed Crane. No, it's Jasper Crane. Okay. She wrote that the conservative so-called movement in the universities seems to me little more than a scramble. It is a back to medievalism movement. I love that. And I cannot see these millions of young veterans and their wives renouncing television, motor cars, radios, deep freezes, and airplanes for the placidity of, as Professor Russell Kirk, the ultra-traditionalist author of the 1953 book, The Conservative Mind. I'd like to read that. The text of the contemporary intellectual right wing imagines and says a society of status. Nor did her opinion improve in 1958. She told Crane that the so-called conservative movement of the Russell Kirk ilk impresses me as not only trying to scuttle backwards, crabwise, to medievalism, but as being singularly asinine on the way. I love that, but I think I'm going to get that book. Let me look for that now. So it's the 1953. I'm going to go to Abe Books. My go-to for used. I used to love Bibliofind, and it seems that Abe Books has taken over that. I suppose it's the same thing. I don't know. Maybe I got a little bit of conservatism. I long for the ye old days of Bibliofind. So this is The Conservative Mind. What was that author? Russell Kirk. Okay, let's see. Let me edit my search because that is way too broad. No, I don't want keywords, The Conservative Mind. I want the title. An author, Russell Kirk. Here we go. Okay. It looks like it was reprinted in 2001. I really wanted the old one in case there's been any updated. Again, updated in 2021. Here's a 1986 version. Looks like that's the oldest. I'd like to get the you see, here's one. It doesn't have a picture. Let's see if it says the year. It doesn't. So that's, people aren't going to buy things if it, I see that's 2001. 1953. A lot of shipping though. Here's 1960. Okay. First edition. Okay, that's hardcover though. But of course, me marking up a first edition would be kind of sacrilegious, wouldn't it? Okay, here's one. Here's a leather-bound version. I don't want that. Okay. We might take a look at this. I'm just very curious about this book. So I think I'm going to pick this up. We might have a good discussion on it. Put in my password, but let's continue here. I don't want to keep this up while you are watching. Her last major influence in the Libertarian movement was on Robert Lefebvre, founder and operator of the Freedom School, later called Rampart College, which we know about, a major institution of 1960s libertarianism. Lefebvre, which I always mispronounce, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing it now, was converted by the discovery of freedom. Interesting. Okay, just want to, there's been times when I've been on Abe Books, and if I don't pick it up right away, like I leave it even for a few minutes, somebody's bought it out under me. Okay, I think I got it here. Oh crap, it wants the security code. of my card. Okay, let me put that in. Okay, here we go. And that reminds me, I need to go to newspapers.com and try to find that old article on me. Rose died in 1968, 1 year after I was born. In her last years, she became, without apparently trying to jibe her new opinions with her old anti-Cold War belief, an enthusiast for the Vietnam War, with a rather typical domino argument of the sort she once disdained. It's weird the way these anti-statists, sometimes at the end of their lives, freak the fuck out. She was even sent under State Department auspices to cover the war for Women's Day in 1966. It says she was the initial conversion experience for the likes of McBride, who learned directly at her feet. Lefebvre and Libertarian editor and publicist Roy Childs is one of my heroes, who became active and central to the movement in the 1970s. Okay, that's it for her section. The next section is Ayn Rand, which I'll record separately. Maybe today you'll be able to tell by if I have different clothes on. Let me transfer this. Okay, here I am for the last part. And it's not a different day, but you can see my husband messed with the drapes behind me. Hold on. I thought I had this ready, but here we go. Ayn Rand. The title is, Tell Them That Russia is a Huge Cemetery and That We Are All Slowly Dying. So, as we know, she was born in Russia, managed to escape to the U.S. And someone approached her at her farewell party and says, and this is where the title comes, if they ask you in America, tell them that Russia is a huge cemetery and that we are all dying slowly. I'll tell them, she promised. And when she came here, she actually got very involved in screenwriting and being involved in Hollywood, admired Cecil DeMille very much, and they became friends. And it says that you can see her, if you look very closely, in crowd scenes in DeMille's epic, The King of Kings. And the book says this is right at the end of the silent movie era. So the fact that she didn't speak English well didn't hamper her, though that wasn't even an issue for long. She mastered English pretty quickly. So it goes on to some of her books. It says the theme of We the Living was not just that the Soviet Union was a hellish nightmare, but that collectivism as a principle is the enemy of the human mind and spirit. While Rand, the philosopher of objectivism, was still decades away, Rand, the enemy of political tyranny, lived in her first public works. And in the beginning, it said that she had a lot of antinomian Nietzscheism. And for instance, there was a play she authored that she called Playhouse Legend. Got warped and changed into something she didn't particularly like. She doesn't like people messing with her work, and turned out being titled The Night of January 16th. And it says in there, her offstage hero is said, admiring, this is worded weird, her offstage hero is said admiringly to have never thought of things as right or wrong. To him, it was only you can or you can't. He always could. The later Rand, the preeminent moralist, would never praise not thinking of right and wrong. I agree more with the later Rand. It says Rand began socializing and communicating with a loose band of right-wing and individualist intellectuals, including Isabel Patterson, the biggest influence on Rand's mature political philosophy. Did she admit that? I know in the earlier book she mentioned it, but then thought Patterson didn't credit her properly. Rand also met and socialized with Rose Wilder Lane and with remnants of the old right, such as Albert J. Nock, who wrote, I'm adding this part, Our Enemy, the State. Gives some quotes by her in which she uses the word faith. And it says, while the later Rand would doubtless bridle at the use of the word faith, she already recognized her political and ideological task. establishing a defense of individualism and capitalism that went deeper, more to the roots, more radical in the true sense than any in existence. As a struggling novelist, she was beginning to see outlines of her task as a radical for capitalism. And this section ends. It talks a lot about her work, The Fountainhead, which if you have not read, I would highly recommend. It's great and warped at the same time. The characters are always bigger, larger than life, and of course, moralists, I guess. Dominique Francone is an interesting character. Howard Rourke himself is an interesting character. Howard Rourke kind of reminds me of, I don't know if he's ever been compared this way. I doubt I'm the first one to think of it, but like a modern day Prometheus. The revolution. Okay, now it's talking about the libertarian revolution in America. The revolution launched in modern form by the 2 Austrian economists and 3 women writers had more fronts on which to fight. Leonard Read, the man who created the institutional framework for that revolution, with the first educational think tank dedicated to pushing what he called the freedom philosophy, had been directly inspired by the works of all of them. He loved Lane and Rand so much that he started a small publishing house to print their work. Thanks to their influence, the first modern institution dedicated to libertarian education, the Foundation for Economic Education, was born in 1946. The splash they made with their books in 1943 would ripple in ways they could never have predicted. I never knew the influence of women in earlier libertarianism, particularly 2 of them I knew of Rand. And perhaps I don't disagree so much with the title of the 3 Furies of Libertarianism. I don't think they would have disagreed with that title. Okay, and I did want to go over what the next chapter would be, because that's the end of that one. Chapter 4, Fighting for the Freedom Philosophy. It starts on page 149. Ooh, this is a long one. We'll probably break this up. Maybe not. It's just I'm not used to the long chapters in this book. Goes to page 224. So it's about 70 pages. Depending upon how dense it is, we might break it up. But I want to go look in the front where it says the summary of these chapters, I think. So we can get an idea of what's going to be in that chapter. Maybe not. Thought for sure. Oh, here we go. There is. Chapter summaries. Chapter 3. Chapter 4. The institutional history of modern libertarianism proper begins with the founding of the first modern libertarian education institute, the Foundation for Economic Education. So we ended with that being inspired by these ladies and the 2 Austrian economists. And I guess that chapter is about that area. Okay. So, ready for chapter 4? I am. This is certainly, I'm getting a good understanding of some things of early American libertarianism I did not know.